Welcome back. We're tracking the Prime Minister's visit to the United States. We still have with us Raymond Vickery, Senior Associate, Center for Strategic and International Studies, R. Chandrashekhar, former Telecom Secretary and former President of NASSCOM, former Ambassador Singh and Ellen Nakashima, National Security Reporter at the Washington Post. Ellen, do you get a sense that US here is somehow seeking support from India and trying to build India as a technological power, as a defense power against China in case of an invasion of Taiwan? In case things go south, is US expecting India's support? Also, will India be a treaty ally in future? Do you think there is work going on that front?
As I mentioned earlier, I don't think the Biden administration or the U.S. government expects India to be a sort of treaty ally partner in military defense of Taiwan should there be an invasion by China. Look, it's clear that India will never. I won't say never, but it's highly unlikely will be a treaty ally of the United States. It aspires to be a great power in its own right. It guards its strategic autonomy and sort of sees itself as a leader or leading voice of what is called the global South, the group of developing and emerging nations. But that said, the Biden administration recognizes that, and they say they appreciate it and they respect it, and they feel like there can still be a strategic partnership, even with India, protecting its strategic autonomy because of these interests in defense, in technology, economy going forward. These things align, and so there's if they see it, no contradiction there.
All right. Ambassador Singh, if I were to come to you in the run-up to this visit and even during the Prime Minister's meetings there in Washington, D.C. and New York, there were questions raised by the American press, American think tanks, politicians about India's record with human rights, treatment of minorities and democratic values. The Prime Minister did seem to address that to a great extent on the floor of the Congress. How do you think the Prime Minister's speech addressed all those concerns, and what would be the big takeaways for you from what the Prime Minister said?
Look, I think it'll take more than just a speech to address it. I don't think the concerns can simply be addressed by your words. They have to be by your actions. And I think it got a little complicated because President Obama gave an interview to CNN almost simultaneously as this was happening, and he was in Athens. And he was sharper in his criticism than President Biden was, because obviously President Biden didn't want to do it in public. He wanted to do it privately. Now, today we've had a BJP chief minister say some intemperate things about President Obama, and I think that is not the approach. And that would really embarrass the Prime Minister. Because what is required there, US is sending a message. And that's why at the beginning of the joint statement itself, they're talking of two democracies coming together. And I think US realizes that even their democracy is under threat. Because if you get Trump re-elected, they're not sure where US democracy will go. So the democracies all over the world, which are under stress. Now, if you have to address that, whether it is in Brazil or it's in Poland or it's in Hungary, then India and US have to be two stable democracies. And we cannot escape from it by saying, no, but it's humanism, it's humanity. Words are not going to address it. New York Times editorial board had a special article, and some of the members, according to New York Times, who were critical on this account, did not address prime ministers, did not attend Prime Minister's address. So there is this lurking, and President Obama was addressing that faction in the Democratic Party, which is agitated over this, that President Biden, by inviting Prime Minister Modi, has actually sidestepped from his commitments, is saying that he's going to have a conclave of democracies. But then it's a balancing, and that's what President Obama also said, that you have to balance your interests. He says that is why he dealt with China. That's why he dealt with Saudi Arabia. So it's a balancing of pragmatism and your value system. And I think this is what Biden is doing. But at the same time, India will continue to be in the middle of the, they'll be watching India carefully. And I think we have to know how to deal with it. And it can't be simply by denying it.
Right. Mr. Chandrashekhar, returning to you, both sides have announced task forces on advanced telecom, Open RAN, R&D in 5G and 6G. Both sides laid emphasis on trusted network, trusted sources in the bilateral network. Give us a sense of the importance of this thrust on trusted networks, trusted sources in the telecom sector. What are we really talking about and envisaging here?
I think here, first and foremost, Parikshit, is the recognition that telecom is the foundation on which the whole of the digital economy rests. And therefore, ensuring that the network is secure in the sense that it is not vulnerable to either individuals or states being privy to what goes on these networks, except in accordance with the law of the land. So that is one key aspect. And going forward, the 5G and 6G technologies will be the basis because they are bringing, greater capability, greater bandwidth. And along with that, arguably both higher security at one end and perhaps even additional security threats. So what is significant is both the collaboration in technology, including the open radio access networks. And that's important because the open networks allow different components from different sources to be joined together. And that has some influence on the competitive environment within that sector, which is important both from an economic as well as a technology standpoint. So I think that collaboration in the telecom space is particularly important. There's another aspect of this joint statement which I think is significant. And that is, the agreement to retain or encourage the current characteristics of the internet, being open, being allowing participation and so on. And that is because I think the recognition is that there is an intimate relationship also between the way the internet functions and democracies. And we've seen also the interplay between some of the technology platforms like social media and elections. And therefore, the course of democracies is also linked in some sense with the way technology moves forward. So I think preserving the foundation on which the digital economy rests, ensuring that digital artifacts are consistent with democratic norms and ideals of both countries, and trying to use them and converge them in a way to preserve democracy and democratic principles. That is particularly important. I just want to mention couple of other quick things. Right. One was the reference to artificial intelligence and recognizing that it is one of the most likely to be a defining technology of this century. And therefore, the collaboration in that space, again, is particularly important because AI is clearly now a dual technology, not only capable of civil and military use, but also capable of use for good as well as good for harm. And therefore, that collaboration with some of the same principles underlying it is something which is very significant. I also found the emphasis on digital public infrastructure.
Mr. Chandrashekhar, very quickly, do you think the US industry, the US government would have raised concerns on India's data protection laws, data localization, cross-border data flows? Would they have demanded transparency, long-term policy stability as far as the tech sector goes?
I'm pretty sure that everybody around the table, whether it is the US or India, does want clarity on the regulatory space. The challenge has been more in crafting regulation which takes into account all the various legitimate concerns. That has not been easy in India. It has not been easy in any country for that matter. And the fact is that the environment and the ecosystem in India is different from that in the US. And therefore, we see different styles of regulation in the US, in Europe, in China, and India will certainly have to look at it from its own point of view. So I think that is certainly a critical point that needs to be kept in mind.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chandrashekhar, for joining us. Thank you very much to Ellen Nakashima as well. And we are going to be taking a short break. I'll request Raymond Vickery to continue being with us. But let me thank Mr. Chandrashekhar, Ambassador K.C. Singh, and Ellen Nakashima for joining us here on our program, giving us their views on Prime Minister's visit to the United States. Lots more coming up. Don't go anywhere.